within the next 5 years. And to me, that's one of the key, I would say, support points for internationalizing currency over the medium term.
Thank you, Vivek. Optimism or euphoria, actually, only time has to tell. Anyway, coming back to Matt, what do you think can be the big starting advantage for India as we explore the process of becoming more international? What are the big starting advantages?
Sure. I mean, there are an enormous amount of advantages that India has in internationalization of the rupee for right now. One of them, obviously, is India is the largest democracy in the world, and that kind of open feel is well received amongst the largest industrial countries in the world, and they're the ones who you're going to want to have be a part of that internationalization. Two is the infrastructure that's being constructed within India to support internationalization. That can be a gift city, which was a project created a couple of years ago by the government to welcome foreign investment in technology and finance. To aid in probably the larger picture of creating India as a technology and finance hub in the region, as well as a stepping stone to internationalization. And the third, as our colleague said, in his ambitious forecast for 2050, growth. India has been on an amazing growth pattern for many years, and trying to internationalize your currency while you're going through such tremendous expansion makes that challenge less difficult to be able to communicate to the international stage, whether it be corporates or governments or institutions like the IMF or the United Nations, that the rupee belongs in various baskets for not just about what's going on today, the 2% versus the 90%, but also the projected future and the projected volume of not only international trade, but also just overall gross domestic product. So those to me are the most important components to the advantages that India has. I think that the democracy component of it, the government supporting incoming foreign investment and technology projects, these are critical to achieving anything in today's modern society. And I think that those are going to be the three pillars of the most benefit to India.
Yeah, democracy, infrastructure, and growth. Actually, these three key advantages as we start.
If I could come in here a minute, Tiago.
Yeah.
See, I think one of the other advantages that we have right now, because it's not just a matter of why would anyone want rupees? They want rupees to be able to buy goods from India, but also a very, very big part is for investment purposes.
Yeah.
Right? So and I think Annapurna was talking about it to some extent, we've really got to clean up that part. I mean, there's they talk about ease of doing business. That's bullshit. I mean, it's not easy. So that needs to be changed. But one of the big pluses, and I think Dr. Subramaniam was very, very aggressively optimistic about the fact that he thinks the rupee is going to be 60 in 25 years. One of the things that I'm not sure, like I said, I make no forecast, not even for next week. It's very easy to make forecasts for 25 years. Nobody's going to ask you about it then. But the point is, today, the rupee is extremely undervalued, right? You go overseas, you talk to anybody from overseas who comes, India is so cheap, right? So, but our manufacturing processes, etc., are still far from being world class. But it's cheap to buy stuff in India. So one of the reasons FDI has been so strong, we are basically selling our assets cheap, right? I mean, in all likelihood, the rupee should be, I would say, 10 rupees stronger today without materially affecting export competitiveness, right? But the reality is the RBI is preventing the rupee from strengthening too much, for good reasons, I would assume. But I think that is one of the big pluses, is that we are already extremely undervalued. So it's a good place to put money.
Okay. I am going to Annapurna Madam. The domestic payment infrastructure has been actually the backbone of settlement system as far as India is concerned. Do you think actually it is going to be some sort of advantage for India if it globalizes that domestic payment infrastructure?
Sure, thanks. Again, a lot of us have very great stories to share about the UPI system in India. You know, the last count, it is the transaction volume count itself is like significantly like about over 85-86% of the India's GDP. Within a short span, the India's cash-based economy has transitioned into a digital economy. But the good thing which comes out of all of that is that the world is really seeing India the way it is digitizing as well, and also the way the banks quickly upgraded their infrastructure to be able to take this challenge. When the whole shift to the digital economy per se came into formation. Now that has got noticed, and hence the partnership that India has tried to establish with several international payment service providers. Of course, the most widely advertised is the Singapore's Pay Now, is all a direct consequence of how the digitization has happened within the country first to start with. And today we have tie-ups with over 10 countries on the global cross-border UPI. Now, just sticking to perhaps even the one that that got done with Singapore. Now, overall, Singapore alone gives you about close to 6-7% of all the inbound remittances. If I were to look at it from a fintech a platform perspective, if anybody were to send a remittance, it's going to cost you or set you back by 2%. You go to a bank and try to do it today, it sets you back by 3% of cost. But the expectation is, as and when the transaction costs in these UPI comes down, it's not yet down there yet, but the expectation is when it comes down, it's going to be happening at a fraction of the cost, and also a near real-time same-day payment as well. So that is a big thing, and I think probably the potential is very much there. Where do we stand now? The liberalization has happened, perhaps restricted to smaller amount caps, like 1000 SGD, only available for family establishments under the LRS, etc., etc. The aim is to actually try and see, we should move this away from simple LRSs to actually use this for significant cross-border settlements. We have seen some examples in the China SIPS system, for example. Usage of central bank digital currency could be one very important aspect here, and to be able to get away from some of these caps as well, move into various other purposes of remittances and not just restricting it to the LRSs. The second one, and which is very important, is data protection and data sovereignty. While the bill is being discussed in the parliament, it is still probably having certain contentious clauses, and I'm not a very expert in this, but there is of course there is some flexibility which has come in data localization, but it is for the lawyers to evaluate and see as to how much of that is really scalable for India to reach where it needs to wants to reach in cross-border settlements. For example, certain countries have set up joint governance boards. So we have seen examples within ASEAN itself, Singapore and a few countries, where they have set up joint governance boards to address implementation issues. So that is also something that potentially the regulator could look at. In nutshell, therefore, expanding the scope of the remittances to cover a lot more purposes than just the LRS, removing the documentation roadblocks for it, right? Today, if I have to go and close an export or an import bill, I do ask documents. There is IDPMS, there is EDPMS, a lot of the customs portals to be closed, in terms of actual settlements. Maybe relaxation on those documentation, very competitive FX pricing, something that could be even considered by the NPCI as well. so that they can potentially look at bulk payments, increasing the amount cap, etc., are of paramount need now.
Okay. The one point is that digital currency, that is one dimension actually which we should be looking at. Coming back to Jamal, actually, I think the subject you would love to talk.
On
The
what?
more, yeah, I think
Yeah. You know, I read something very interesting on
yeah.
central bank digital currencies just the other day. And the guy made a lot of sense to me. What he said is, you know, today, cash, the currency you hold, is actually a tax, right? Because you don't get any return on cash.
Okay.
Okay. So his point was central bank digital currencies should actually pay a return. Now, if they did that, the usage of them would explode. Banks, the banks would certainly be in a lot of trouble. The central bank would have to manage that. But what I think is something, something where the driving force is so large and the thinking is already there, it is going to happen. Central bank digital, meaning it won't just be, it'll be a replacement for cash, right? And one of the points that Annapurna made, I wanted to touch on that, which is that I'm fully with you that the cross-border flows, right, have to be completely digitized. I mean, you try to send the money overseas and you know how much it's costing, right? So again, when the driving force is so large and the technology is there, it is going to happen. So one of my questions for you, Annapurna, is what does that do to banks, right? Because banks are sitting on lots of fat margins when they don't do anything to earn it, right? It's just that they have got, because they have a authorized dealer's license, they get all this malai. But as technology takes over or does more and more, I really wonder whether there might be a real threat to the sort of, around the existence of banks, but certainly the profitability of banks. What do you think as a banker?
Sure. I mean, it's always been an existential question, I would say, and it's always been something that banks have been thinking through over the years. In fact, I'm still surprised that probably, missions haven't taken over what the banks are doing on the foreign exchange business yet. And hence, it is also very, very important as the margins diminish that banks actually start using more and more of the platforms, move them to the platform, and then start getting into more value-added risk management discussions with clients rather. And I think it is almost there, getting there, right? Even globally, if you really look at it, even from a MiFID perspective, best execution arrangements are coming into place. Where you need to necessarily justify the fair value of why you are charging a client X or Y. And it is sooner than later. In India, of course, the RBI came out with the retail margins disclosures for retail clients. So sooner than later, I think it's just a question of time that banks will start putting all of these onto the platform and then move on to do more value-added works for clients. It's already happening. Yes, it is just a little more to come.
Okay, coming back to your question, when we find that the inclusion of global bond indices, that itself is a tough task. Actually, we have been trying, and then actually, whether we like it or not, it is not happening. And every other day, actually, there is a news item saying that we are close to it. Do you think actually internationalization starts from there? Actually, your bond getting included in the global bond index, which is not happening right now. How are we going to the aim for internationalization of the currency? Jamal?
I think again, coming back to the point of you need rupees to make investments, and again, while RBI has got a lot of things to do in this process of internationalization, Big Daddy, the government, is the one who is really putting the blocks, right? They are uncomfortable today with the being in the bond index. I don't know the exact reasons, but it's again, I feel it's something that is inevitable. If not next year, then the following year. The sooner the better, obviously. I feel that, and certainly the CEA's comments, that there have been some really good things that India has done in the financial markets in the last few years. So I think we are strong, and it's also good that we're being conservative. But I think that it will come. I don't think that is a starting point for internationalization. It's just another, side effect of it, if you will.
Okay. Vivek, actually, it's about economics, actually. So consumption has been the key for US to have been the dominant economy over the last 50 years, let us put it. Do you think the emergence of Indian middle class and the sharply rising consumption level would make internationalization of rupee much easier? That's number one question. What is actually basically internationalization, broadly speaking? What are the benefits that you think for the economy in general and for that matter, employment in particular?
So from a consumption perspective, Thaguji, if you look at, let's say, US, they have around about 68% consumption GDP ratio. Basically, that's what the share is. In case of India, our consumption share has been around 58 to 60%, depending upon which year you talk about. But largely, it has been stable in that range, 58 to 60%. Now, again, internationalization is something which is an event, happens over a long period of time, and I do remember Jamal saying that it's happening even now. It's just that you have to take a cumulative view. If you're talking about a 20-year perspective, then you'll have to add bits and pieces every year. So 20 years down the line, I guess, yes, in a cumulative sense, it will have an impact, because if your currency is meaningfully internationalized, then ideally the rate at which you are raising capital is cheaper than otherwise would have been, which essentially means that it's a boost for consumption. And essentially, it means that you are also importing more. So in some sense, I guess, so it's kind of a double whammy. If you see something which US also kind of goes through, is that while it runs one of the most internationalized currency in the world, it also simultaneously runs a very huge current account or a trade deficit in the world at the same time, and both coexist. So in case of India also, or for any, or for that matter, any economy, I think if the currency is internationalized by a significant margin, it is going to have an impact on consumption. It is going to boost consumption, which essentially means that some part of it will divert towards the global markets, which means that you are going to import more than you're going to export, and you are probably going to continue running a deficit. So this also makes me believe that probably China is not going to be as eager in terms of internationalizing its currency, because currency internationalization also has its own costs. And one of the costs is, in economics, you call it the Triffin paradox, or the Triffin, I think, dilemma, wherein the central banks, because of its need to maintain monetary policy sovereignty, as well as the obligation to supply the internationalized currency to the rest of the world, will at times will have conflict of interest in these two objectives. So yes, it will have an impact on consumption. To answer the question, from an employment perspective, I think you can expect to have a rub-off impact on employment, because it's something which will present itself over a longer period of time. If you expect internationalized currency to help in lowering the cost of capital, if you would expect internationalized currency to open up vistas for more foreign funding than otherwise would have been, then the non-financial sector will probably have access to more capital at a cheaper rate. So this is bound to percolate to, let's say, overall growth conditions in the economy. This is bound to percolate to employment conditions in the economy. But this would be a trickle-down impact of internationalization. and this trickle down impact will play over a longer period of time. So it is not going to play out in the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Thank you, Vivek. Actually, that's the point. Actually, trickle down impact will be there. Coming back to Matt, actually, a curious question. Actually, why no country other than China at any time has embarked on internationalizing their currency? Let's say a Brazil or a Korea, they never tried internationalizing the currency. Do you think any reason for it?
Well, I think it is happening. It's all scalable based on the size of of the respective countries and their GDP size and their ambitions. But it's happened in Latin America in the past 2 or 3 years. And while some of those economies may be significantly smaller than India or China, certainly, but Chile, Peru, Colombia have electronified their markets. They have their average daily volume has either doubled or tripled in that period of time, and their percentage of market share has increased in terms of the internalization of the offshore market. So it has been happening, not to the same scale as a country like China or India. But there are plans amongst other countries to do the same. You know that in January of 2024, Korea will be easing their restrictions on foreign participants and the onshore-offshore convergence. There's legislation currently on the desktops and on the table for Q1 or Q2 of 2024 in Taiwan. And obviously India has already begun to take those steps as well. And it's super important to understand the difference between the onshore and the offshore. And when the onshore, which is very much controlled and managed by the banks in India for obviously their natural inventory, the offshore is just a mathematics of the onshore plus the forward curve and interest rate risk. And when you converge the two of those and you start to intertwine the onshore liquidity to not only price the onshore, but also to directly be pricing the offshore, then that's the real internalization of, a 30 to $70 billion a day market like the INR is. Once that internalization happens within the Indian banks, which is, like I said, happening in other countries of the world right now, just not with the same type of ambition of becoming a global reserve currency, you can start to see the dramatic kind of benefit for all the local Indian banks and the RBI especially to be able to not only benefit from that internalization and internationalization, but also to be able to monitor and control and risk management the onshore and the offshore in a combined way.
Okay, basically convergence of onshore and offshore, I think to a large extent helps in internationalization of the currency. Is it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that process has been, as I said, has been taking place in a half a dozen countries in the last 2 years. So it's not a new idea. It's not it's not brand new technology. We've introduced this technology in all over Latin America, and we plan to do in other countries as well. And it's had enormous positive impacts not only on bank revenue streams, but also on state bank and central bank management of their overall country currency risk.
Okay, thank you.
So, excuse me, on that, India already, the onshore offshore price is more or less the same.
Yeah,
the arbitrage has been eliminated.
Yeah,
but it's still the players are different. And
Yes.
that again goes back to the pavilion, regulation and sort of nervousness of letting it out. And I think that's really the next steps are over there.
Okay. Coming
Yeah,
to
I take a couple of questions. Sorry, on the chat box, you would like to take one or two?
Yeah, we will take it fair actually. Let's finish this. Annapurna madam, actually, banking perspective. Do you think actually basically the promote international rupee as an international currency, it is also necessary to increase the share of rupee in international markets through the greater use of rupee in trade and services for settlement of financial transactions? Do you think Indian banking sector, for that matter, has the depth and bandwidth for having an internationalized currency?
Oh, yeah, so let me just take it in two parts, right? One is the promotion of the usage of INR in settling transactions globally. Now that again, we've kind of, even if you were to really look at what we tried so far, even with settling for crude with Russia, or even trade credits for any of those purposes, there is still an insistence, of course, that it has to be settled in UAE dirhams, Chinese yuan, not necessarily Indian rupees. And the reason is, maybe unlike the China model of renminbi internationalization, in the India model, the countries with whom India trades are either heavily skewed towards India exporting into them or India importing from them. And maybe, and hence perhaps one of the thought processes is that should we start off with countries where we potentially run a good surplus? It could be services exposed to the US, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, etc. In fact, ever since the Indian rupee invoicing hedging circular came back in 2011, there has been definitely at least a very good progress in Indian rupee invoicing amongst a lot of the software exporters in India. Now, moving ahead to see whether how much of financial transactions can kind of look at, if that means how do I finance this trade happening between them? How do I even raise as banking system Indian rupee liquidity, whether it is masala bonds or any of those aspects that we have seen. Gift City becomes also a very, very critical player in the story as we go forward. We have seen certain masala bonds, 81 bonds getting listed in Gift City in the very recent past as one of the primary, exchanges. But I guess there is definitely more room for the Indian banking system to play to kind of generate that INR liquidity as well by raising it capital internationally. The second one and the most important one is that when you start to look at disbursing working capital in Indian rupee, or guarantees in Indian rupee, assuming a situation where the guarantee gets invoked, there needs to be a liquid market at that time to convert the Indian rupee into the home currency. In essence, the 24/5 market of INR has to be there in size and scale in practice. And I guess that's where skilling a lot of the offshore branches of Indian banks, their treasury dealing rooms with really skilled capacity, providing good market risk limits to them to be able to trade INR round the clock. All of them will come, heavily handy when it comes to actually the acceptance of Indian rupee as a financing as well as a trading currency as well.
Okay, madam. Actually, we are running out of time. Actually, people can post the questions. Before that, I will ask one important question to Vivek. The frequent global shocks, let it be GFC 2008 or global inflation 2022, did not reach our shores because of our internalized shock absorbers. If the currency becomes international, would not these global shocks transmit into our economy with greater impacts?
That's a very interesting question. And the answer to me is not clear. Answer to me is not clear. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why because one, there are reasons to believe that if you have a sufficiently internationalized currency, then it helps to mitigate some of the global shocks. Whereas at the same time, there are reasons to argue that when you are in the transition process, then there is a possibility that some of the global shocks can hit you in a much more amplified manner. So both are possible depending upon whether you've kind of reached at the end of the spectrum, or whether you're still taking the early steps towards internationalization. Now, having said that, when let's say 10 years down the line or 15 years down the line, you are sufficiently internationalized, and not only you, there are other competitors in the market who are also sufficiently internationalized. So basically, we are talking about a world where the hitherto hard currencies like dollar, euro, pound, yen have lost a little bit of significance vis-a-vis what they are currently. So from a strategic perspective, 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line, if you have a global shock, the question then would be, where do you go? So you have a clear-cut answer now. Where do you go if you have a global shock? I'll buy dollars, I'll buy yen, I'll pile upon Swiss franc. What would I do 20 years down the line? Would I continue to adopt the same strategy? Because I would be living in a multipolar world. I would be having multipolar currencies. I would be having many internationalized currencies. Would the current safe haven set of currencies continue to apply 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line? I doubt that would, because the basket would change, the basket would evolve. And from a longer term perspective, I guess the risk will be much more diffused in the currency market than it is currently, because currently in a state of shock, you just have one or two currencies to go to. So I guess the answer would depend. What time horizon are we talking about? Are you sufficiently internationalized or not? Are you still in the early stages? So for me, it's a question which does not have a clear answer, and the answer would depend upon the context and the cycle that you are in.
Thank you. Thank you. Jamal, actually, the one serious question to you. After hearing this webinar for the last 1.5 hours, will you go and buy dollar rupee or sell dollar?
I told you, I don't know what's going to happen. That
Oh,
is
God, you cannot say that.
I'm the only one who tells you the truth. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm not going to buy or sell. No, but generally, if you're going to say on a long-term basis, I'm with the ex-chief economic advisor, because I believe the rupee already is so cheap, you know. And but boy, it's tough to tell clients, right, that the rupee is only going to strengthen. I don't believe that. But I think that the rupee is a good buy at this point, which is, like I said, why we see FDI rising so fast.
Actually, here the audience is full of short-term traders. Not
Sorry about that.
traders.
I'm no good. I'm no good for that.
Okay, thank you. One audience question, actually, whether Annapurna, can you take it, actually? This is regarding India has done an agreement with UAE on INR AED trade settlement. I have two questions. Will a swap be needed between two central banks to ensure INR internationalization? Unless one is done, will USD INR impact of such agreement stay neutral? I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
So actually a very good question, and a corollary to this is like what People Bank of China has done. They have, if I recall right, 40 currency swap agreements globally. So yes, that is becomes a very important aspect to ensure that the liquidity of the currency is available at any point of time. Unless again we are doing with markets where you have a balanced trade, you're kind of both importing and exporting with very similar or if not equal quantums. So yes, it is there, and I would also probably say that it is definitely there in the roadmap for the regulator as well, to consider doing many more swaps with some of these geographies as well.
Okay. Vivek, will you take this question? If I am a buyer of Indian product in Africa or Latin America, and my supplier is invoicing in INR, then I stand the currency risk where I have very little knowledge about how INR would move vis-a-vis my local currency, and thereby won't have a very clear understanding of my pay risk. Thus, don't you think RBI decision to curb volatility of rupee is a very important factor for internationalization of the rupee? See, basically the macroeconomic stability.
So two parts to this question. One is that, let's say, volatility suppression by the central bank. What are the costs and benefits? So it's an act, central bank is intervening, and no action done by the central bank is free of costs and benefits. So is FX intervention. So volatility is being suppressed. It's good to say that sometimes that rupee has been one of the best performing or least volatile currencies in the peer space, and it actually comes out in the chart. Whether you look at historical volatility, whether you look at implied vols, rupee kind of stands out as being one of the most stable currencies. DM, EMs, current account deficit EMs, no matter which way you slice the data. So RBI has been doing that job. It's good. It's keeping rupee stable. And one of the factors, I think, more important than the level of the currency, which traditionally has been understood as an important source of export competitiveness. Typically, you would understand a weaker currency to lead to betterment of exports. So we've seen in our own analysis that it's not just the level of currency. Much more important is the volatility of currency.
Okay.
So a less volatile currency is much more supportive of your exports than a highly volatile currency, but a weaker currency. So that's something which is true. The other aspect is that while suppressing volatility to this extent, in some way, RBI has assumed the role of an outsourced agent for the corporate sector in India. So basically, the corporate sector has outsourced its USD INR risk management to RBI. So it might lead to complacency over the longer term. And if in case there is a global shock, which RBI is not able to control to that extent, you will have a lot of guys who are on the wrong side of the fence.
Yeah, another last two questions we will take. One question to make Jamal. How are you seeing the internationalization of the rupee on the forward market? Can we see the rupee forward levels as a factor in interest rate differential?
I don't think that really relates to the internationalization. I think it relates to the interest rate differentials. I think the CEA put that very clearly that our inflation differential has come down so much, so likely interest rate differentials will also stay low, which means the forwards will stay low. Very bad for my business. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see more volatility, but hey, what can you do?
Okay, one question to Castle. Matt, for being an international currency, it is imperative that there is adequate market liquidity. How do you see the exchange rate liquidity in rupee as well as its related rate products? Rupee liquidity.
Sure. The rupee liquidity, I mean, we all know the volumes that go through rupee on the onshore and the offshore each day is quite large, 30 to 50 billion. And, the liquidity is very deep. As I kind of said before, and our colleague made the point of talking about the absence of the arb between the onshore and the and the offshore with the absence of an arb, but there still is a forward exposure, and the difference here on that NDF and that forward exposure, it gives an incredible advantage to the local banks to be able to have that book of forward exposure, and that additional book, that new forward exposure that falls into all of the local Indian banks' balance sheet becomes another tool in their ability to manage their interest rate risk, and that interest rate risk assists them with their rates products. It assists them with their issuances for various bonds on behalf of corporates or central bank activity. It's been incredibly valuable to the Latin American countries and banks that we've helped with. And while the Indian market is much more mature and much more sophisticated in their ability to handle large capital market transactions, it took some of these local Latin American banks maybe 6 months or a year to realize just how invaluable that forward exposure is to the overall bank, which they had no idea about before. And I think overall, India is in a very strong position because the banking community is strong. The skills and the talents within the Indian banking community is equally as strong. They're all seasoned capital markets participants, and bridging the gap between grabbing that forward exposure, creating revenue streams, but also being able to risk manage their other product lines is it might be unmatched in the world in terms of who's next to internationalize their currency. So I think that India is in a great position. I think that like I said, their community, the banking community is strong. The skills and the members and the workers within these banks are maybe unmatched in the world compared to other countries that are embarking upon this. And I believe that there's a lot of support from the rest of the world to help India do this. I think it's it's going to happen, and I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be a great 10-year process, and the key is taking step one, and I think India has already done that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that optimistic note. I think we are completely run out of time, and it has been lovely talking to all of you. Thank you very much, actually. Venkatesan? Mute, you are on mute.
Yeah. Okay now?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we bring this insightful seminar on internationalization of rupee to a close, on behalf of SYFX Treasury Foundation, I express my gratitude for your active participation and invaluable contribution to the event. We are very much honored to have the distinguished experts and speakers from the financial industry and academia who keep sharing their expertise, research, and thoughts on the subject. Their presentations shed light on the significance of the internationalization of Indian rupee and its implications on the global economic landscape. We extend our heartfelt thanks to each of them for the enlightening and thought-provoking insights. A special word of thanks goes to Dr. Krishnamurthy Subramanian, our keynote speaker, who had taken time out of his routine work despite there being a time zone difference. His elucidation on the topic has thrown more insight for the markets to delve in. Other speakers, Mr. Jamal Maklai, Mr. Matt, Mr. Vivek, and Ms. Annapurna, whose profound knowledge and engaging discourse captivated us throughout the day. Okay, all their efforts to enlighten us on the intricacies and potential benefits of rupee internationalization are truly commendable. Moreover, I would like to acknowledge the presence and active participation of all the attendees. Your enthusiastic engagement, thought-provoking questions, and eagerness to learn have added immense value to the seminar. Finally, let us not forget to appreciate the continuous support and guidance from our mentor, Mr. B.S. Murthy. His vision and encouragement have been the driving force behind organizing such a seminar and other such enriching events. Lastly, I would like to thank all the members of SYFX Treasury Foundation for their unwavering support and encouragement in making this seminar a success one. As we depart from this gathering, let us carry with us the knowledge and gain and the insights shared during this seminar. The internationalization of rupee is a crucial topic which is gaining the momentum even across government corridors, merits continued attention and exploration. And I trust that the discussion sparked today will lead to further advancements in this domain. Once again, thank you, each one of you, for your enthusiastic participation and contribution. We look forward to welcoming you to future seminars and events that aim to foster growth and progress in the financial landscape. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Vivek.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.